Hi everyone, Lior here with another Jumpstart Lightning episode. I have my friend with me, Ben, coming back to the show to talk to me about how to deploy Azure Arc-enabled data services with kubectl. Play the music. Hi everyone, Lior here with another Jumpstart Lightning episode, and I have on the show again Ben Weissman. Ben, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great. You know, you and I, we met on campus few months ago. It was already
yes.
seems like ages ago, but it was just only a few months ago, and we talked about this idea of you coming back to the show to talk to me about things that's got to do with Azure Arc-enabled data services and Kubernetes and all that. But before we're nerding out and talking about all those good things, for those of you who don't know you, who you are and what is it that you do?
Well, I'm Ben. I'm based out of Nuremberg, Germany, which is why it took us that long to finally meet in person on campus, which was great. Data platform MVP. I'm running a small consultancy firm here. We mainly focus on data warehousing and BI, but we mainly work for mid-market customers, which means infrastructure is also part of the deal. And therefore, Arc-enabled data services is part of the deal, of course, because many of our customers, for lots and lots of reasons, either they're not mentally ready, or they don't have the bandwidth, or they're in restricted industries. They cannot move to the public cloud, and bam, Azure Arc, here we are. That's what we do. So that really nicely fits into the niche for many of our customers.
And I like this statement. They're not mentally ready. It's
Well,
it raised some questions, but still, it's still a great way to put it.
honestly, for many people, that's what it is, because they
Right.
give you all these excuses. Yeah, my data is not secure in a public data center. I'm like, yeah, I've seen your server room, and I'm pretty sure any data center is way more secure than that thing where anybody can pull the plug, literally.
Yeah. Well, so Ben, you were on the show few months back. I think it was more than a year at this point. You were on the show.
It was a while, yes.
Yeah, it was a while. And so Ben, take me for a second, like down memory lane. What is it that we talked about last time?
Well, last time we talked about this, basically. We talked about Arc-enabled data services. However, what we did last time is we were trying to do something fun with it. So when we look at Arc-enabled data services, it basically means we can deploy something like a SQL managed instance on-prem and all other kinds of cool stuff. And what we did last time is we kind of left what's happening in the background and deployed that through a Stream Deck, which was also pretty fun, because all I did was I was pushing a button on my Stream Deck, and I had another MI, and I pushed the
Yeah.
button again, and there was another MI. And we kind of agreed that this is a fun thing to do, but it may not exactly be what most customers actually need. So what I would like to focus on today is this, which is a subset of the previous slide, because, as we said, those customers that are the target group, I would say, of something like Azure Arc or Azure Arc-enabled data service are those that I say do not move to the cloud, because some really can, some don't want to. Let's leave that out of the equation.
Yeah.
That means they may or may not have the knowledge of Azure CLI, Azure PowerShell module, and all the other ways that you can work with Arc. But they may have Kubernetes knowledge. And what I would like to talk about today, and what I would like to show you today, is how we can basically deploy all the magic of Arc-enabled data services using just native Kubernetes tools, without any Azure native tools at all, without going to the portal, without using Azure Data Studio, without using the Azure CLI or any of that. Because I think many customers are looking at that and are like, oh, we need to learn so much new stuff. And I'm like, well, no, you don't, because if you already know about Kubernetes, and let's face it, those customers that are not moving to the cloud, many of them are still looking at how to containerize stuff. So they
Yeah.
may have that baseline already.
So you teed this up pretty nicely. And the one thing that I'm taking out of this, which is something, Ben, you and I, we talked about it, and it's something that I always talk about when I'm doing customer meetings and presentations and whatnot. I always emphasize this notion of Azure Arc was always designed with a not disruptive state of mind, meaning that you're using the things that you are used to, whether you are used to Azure Portal, or you're using to Azure CLI, or you're used to Kubernetes at this, in this case, or more specifically, kubectl. So you know what? Show me the magic.
Let's dive into it. Let me give you a 30-second briefing on what my environment looks like, just
Sure.
so you see there is really nothing magic going on here. I got a Kubernetes cluster. Let me zoom out here for 1 second, just so this looks a bit easier to read.
Yeah.
We got 4 nodes, 1 control plane, 3 worker nodes, so pretty standard. Not high available with the master node, but that doesn't really matter. Okay, let's zoom back in here. Got some storage deployed, of course, so we got local storage and NFS in that case. Other than that, our default namespace is like Flannel. We got our local storage. I got Metal LB as my load balancer, so we don't have to rely on dynamic ports and all that yada yada yada. Other than that, this is a pretty fresh installation. So we got our Metal LB, no other CRDs, and CRDs are one of my favorite Kubernetes feature because that's really what helps you make complex stuff easy to grasp, easy to analyze. So if we say, hey, I don't care about Metal LB, well, nothing is left.
Okay.
All right, cool. So far, so good. Before we can deploy Arc-enabled data services through kubectl, through kubectl, we need a couple of CRDs because otherwise we don't want to be responsible for tying all these moving parts together. And this is made very easy for us through a bootstrapper process. So, and you can get that bootstrapper YAML from the Azure Arc GitHub repo. So this is not something that I've invented. So on the right, we have the default. And on the left, basically, this is mine. And basically, all I did here is I changed the namespace variable to something called Arc. Call that whatever you want. If you know what Kubernetes is, you know all this. And basically, what it will deploy for us is a namespace, cluster role binding, a couple of roles, service account, and a job. That job is the first thing that does a little bit of magic for me. I'm just setting my context here, and boom. We now watch this.
So we just deployed the basically the YAML file. That's the start. That's really just kind of how.
Correct. And as you can see, that took like 2 seconds. It's already done. And well, it doesn't do a lot, but it still does a lot. And what do I mean by that? If I now check my CRDs, there's all that magic that comes with Arc. So we have my SQL managed instances. We got our data controllers, our Active Directory controllers, all the different components. Brand new here, the Kafka provider. So you don't have to use the built-in logging if you don't want to.
Yeah.
All that is now available. Now my Kubernetes cluster, which had no idea what Arc is, knows about all these things. If we think
and this is, Ben, this is just kind of taking a pause for a second. This was kind of the entire idea behind Kubernetes. If you coming back to the origin of Kubernetes, Kubernetes was always designed to be a platform in order for you to build platform on top of that. Azure Arc is, or specifically Azure Arc-enabled data services, what we're seeing right now, and even more specifically, the data controller, right? These are the platforms that can actually be built on top of Kubernetes, and that YAML deployment that you just did, that's really just a translation of all of that. This kind of boils down to that, right?
And I mean, the really amazing part is how much complexity it takes out of, because if you think about what the data controller does, it takes care of all the deployments, all the update, but it also deploys the Grafana and the Kibana interface. It deploys the connector to the Azure portal itself or to the Azure backplane, all of that. If I would tell you, yeah, you need to deploy that manually, so please deploy 7 of that and 5 of those pods and whatever, and all the storage and whatnot, could it be done? Yes, but everybody would walk away because it would be basically unmanageable. Whereas like this, the next thing we're going to do is pretty straightforward again. Because now I can say I'm deploying a resource which is of type data controller, which matches back to my Arc data controller here. I'm going to give it a name. I could get it from a private registry. I'm not providing anything for that because I'm just taking the public registry. Coming from the Arc repository, I'm providing my image tag. I'm running this on-prem. There's a couple of things that you just need to take care of. And if you've deployed Arc data services before through any of the other tools, those are exactly the questions that you're being asked. What kind of Kubernetes cluster is that, et cetera, et cetera. All your settings, all your ports, whatnot.
And,
all right, cool.
And Ben, one one thing that is interesting here, as we're looking at this Kubernetes manifest and YAML files and all that, in my head, when I'm seeing this type of stuff, automatically I go to those places of pipelines, because this is really the best or the easiest way. I want to say maybe the easiest is a better term here, to infuse this type of deployments into existing pipelines, which are
Yes.
Kubernetes-oriented pipelines. That's
Correct.
really kind of that a lot of the power comes in.
Totally agree. Lots of standard again in here, like storage definitions for logs and data.
Mhm.
And then the other thing that we will need is 2 secrets, basically, because we
Mhm.
need to be able to log into our logging and metrics interfaces, or Kibana and Grafana.
Yep.
I'm creating those 2 secrets here from the command line. I could have created a YAML for that as well, but for a secret, well,
Mhm.
as always in Kubernetes, those secrets, they are hashed, they are not encrypted. So make sure to change those afterwards. Again, nothing that is not Kubernetes standard. And now all I'm doing here is I say kubectl apply on my YAML manifest.
Bam.
And now I got my data controller in the deploying state.
So Ben, I want to recap this for a second, okay? Because as we are seeing the pods getting created and all that, which is kind of a great illustration to what I want to say here. At the end of the day, right? This is a single, basically, descriptor. This is a single YAML file that is deploying the data controller, which is responsible for deploying the entire data services stack. Like that's the engine, that's the brain. And again, I'm coming back to, just wanted to ask you for a second, because obviously you talk to a lot of customers and you meet a lot of people. And I wanted to ask you, do you see people infusing that into their existing Kubernetes practices? Like, what's the trend that you're seeing happening out there in the wild?
That's a tough question, because
It
the
is Jumpstart
knowledge,
Lightning,
I would say, knowledge in Kubernetes is from here to here, depending on who you talk to. So for some people, even thinking about Kubernetes, that's a huge barrier for them. Why ever? Containers are great. And then I just recently spoke to another customer that was like, "Oh yeah, that's cool. We can do that in Kubernetes. Do you want to do that on vanilla Kubernetes, or you want to do it on OpenShift, just so we know which team we connected to?" I was like, "You got 2 different Kubernetes teams. Okay, that's a first. Cool." But once you're behind that barrier of getting people to understand, and also getting them to see the benefits of containerized applications, getting them to understand, especially if you're staying on-prem for the time being, this is kind of part of your digital transformation. They totally see that. And I mean, keep in mind, we're now at line 33 of my script, but that's because I had all these intermediate things in there.
Right.
Usually we could have just one line of code. We say kubectl up, which especially, again, for those that are like, either I want to do this for dev purposes, so I want to be able to respin that up, or just for a POC, I want to be able to have my different environments all running out of different code blocks. So once you're at the I got Kubernetes stage, this is a piece of cake, because it just really nicely fits in there. So they don't even have to adjust anything else. And this is what's so great about this.
Yeah. And even, if you're thinking about that, and just kind of thinking about for a second about some of the automations that we have in the Jumpstart, when we're deploying data services, intentionally, we're using ARM templates to do that, because of the ease of parameterization and the fact that it's a bit more of a, declarative language and all that. But, as I'm thinking about, again, as I'm thinking about these type of deployments, these are much more oriented towards folks that got Kubernetes practices in place. Like you mentioned, an organization or a customer with 2 Kubernetes teams. But if you're thinking about, like, if you have dedicated Kubernetes practices, this is like, that's it. It's part of it. There's no need to re-architect anything in your deployment processes.
It's basically 3 extra manifests that just go into your library. And again, this is kind of the nice part. And
super cool.
And I mean, yes, you could do that with ARM templates as well, and it would be just as valid and would get you to the same. But many of those that I currently talk to are just like, well, we have no idea about Azure, and then getting them to understand ARM templates. I mean, you could do it with Bicep, which makes it a little easier, but still, you're kind of taking the detour almost for them. So I have to say, all my deployments these days, I'm just using the YAML manifests.
Makes sense.
This, of course, also deployed quite a bunch of storage for us, all happening behind the scenes, because why would we actually care about that? And if we check our data controller, it is ready. So while we were talking here for 2.5, 3 minutes, that's all it took. I was cheating a little, I'll admit that, because I pre-pulled the images. Because keep in mind, I mean, it's 20 gigs of images. Is it really cheating when you just get your stuff in place? Because in prod, you would do the same thing, because you don't want to rely on your internet connection to be up for images to move back and forth.
Yeah.
And then again, we have, this is a standard Kubernetes resource. It's a data controller, so I can do stuff like, hey, kubectl describe on that data controller, and gives me all the details. Like it's telling me, oh, by the way, you're not even on the latest version. You could go there now if you want, et cetera, et cetera. It deployed all kinds of services for me. So everything in the background, native Kubernetes. And that is the same thing no matter how you deploy it. So if I would be deploying this not through native Kubernetes tools, output would be exactly the same. It deployed my Grafana. For me, it deployed my Kibana. All that is just there now, because it came all through that manifest without me even dedicatedly saying, hey, I want a Grafana or a Kibana. It's just part of what Arc-enabled data services is.
Super cool.
All right, now we got the data controller, which is the brain. We can't go without it, but that's kind of like, yeah, we get the Azure portal and we're going to stop there. The Azure portal is pretty cool, but the cool thing is actually having accessible services, and same thing is with the data controller. So let's also deploy a managed instance. And CRD, I want a SQL managed instance. I'm going to give it a name. I'm using it as a developer. So all the licensing stuff, etc. Is it general purpose or is it business critical? All the settings that come with a managed instance. I'm again referring to a secret that I'm going to deploy in a sec. And I'm deploying my resources and limits. Also my limits and requests, which is super important in the context of Arc, because sometimes, especially in dev test environments, people might be, well, let it just grab what it can get. Keep in mind, in Arc data services, you basically pay based on what you're setting here in your limits. So set this to something reasonable that matches your workloads, but also matches your wallet, if that makes sense.
Very important point. Yeah.
I'm creating my secret. I'm creating my MI. And again, all I'm doing is kubectl apply. My managed instance just got created. I already got my endpoint and everything, but my status is now creating, because again, this did create a bunch of storage objects for me, but mainly it is spinning up a bunch of pods for me. So got a SQL MI 1 HA-0. The SQL MI 1 will follow up shortly. And well, give it 2 minutes or so, and we're done.
Yeah, I mean, that's really, it's really remarkable to see how far we come when it comes to these type of platforms, these type of solutions. When Azure Arc-enabled data services was just formed, when the team started to work on the integration with Azure Arc-enabled Kubernetes and all of that, this is really where this notion of a platform for platform was formed. And what we're seeing right now is really, like I mentioned, that's the translation for that, like deploying all these resources. And like you just showed me, right? You have a resource that is a type of data controller. You have a resource that is a type of SQL managed instance. This is possible because of the power of Kubernetes, and also the fact that we built the solution on top of that, which is data services in this case. So super cool to see.
And it also means, even if you're, at least in the POC phase, if you're not a Kubernetes professional, which again is kind of one of the other barriers we are regularly seeing, once you understood the context of Arc-enabled data services, again, all you're asking for is, I want a data controller, I want a SQL managed instance, I want an Arc-enabled Postgres. As long as you know what you're asking for, you do not really have to, because again, all the magic, the services, the storage, you need that, but it's taken good care of. So
Yeah, and we can already see that, SQLMI is deployed. 4 out of 4, we're good to go. Super easy, super clutch.
Good. So we got all our pods ready. From that point, it usually takes a couple of extra seconds just for the magic to happen within the pods, getting our master DB, model DB, etc. ready. And again, that thing, it's showing an age of about 2 minutes. So we're probably going to end up at like 2:33 minutes tops. That's how long it takes. Because that's also, again, if we were talking about pipelines. If this would take hours, people would be like, yeah, why would I do that? 2:33. I was pretty close with my guess.
Yeah.
If I want to integrate something like that in my pipelines, it needs to be fast. Because if I'm telling my devs, yeah, every single time you deploy a new version of your app or your database, you're also getting a new instance, but it's going to take you 5 hours, they're going to be like,
yeah,
that doesn't sound like a great idea. I guess they can live with an extra 2 minutes, 33 seconds, knowing that they're actually going to a fresh environment.
And Ben, I remember the initial conversations I used to have when Azure Arc-enabled data services would just kind of went into preview. I remember the initial conversations around the comparison between SQL managed instance that is an Azure SQL managed instance and Azure Arc-enabled SQL managed instance. And one of the first things that came up is the fact that one is Windows based, but another one is Linux based, which automatically makes the process faster when it comes to the size of the images and everything's got to do with that. So if you ever deploy the Azure SQL managed instance in Azure and then you go and deploy SQL managed instance in Azure Arc-enabled data services, give us a call. Let us know what you think. So yeah.
Well, in all fairness, if I deployed in Azure, there's also some infrastructure parts that have already been pre-deployed here. But yeah, the Linux versus Windows part, just deploy Nginx on Linux and then deploy Internet Information Service on Windows in containers. Well, the advantage of Internet Information Services is that you cannot just get coffee, you can also get lunch while that deploys. But there's always pros and cons, I guess.
Right.
Again, we got our endpoints, and just to finish this off, let's save my super secret password, username, and endpoint into some variables for SQL CMD. And there's my Microsoft Azure SQL Managed Instance, Azure Arc with my version, etc., etc. We only configured the basics, so we went with the defaults for everything. Like by default, the agent is not enabled. By default, it's using this collation and this language. That's all stuff that we could have configured in the beginning in our YAML manifest.
Yeah.
Or a JSON manifest for that matter, if anybody prefers that. Or we could obviously just do a kubectl edit SQLMI and do all these edits and changes now, depending on what we're looking at. And just like that, in I would say a net deployment time of 6-7 minutes, we deployed everything from literally zero, except for a bare naked Kubernetes cluster, up to a up and running SQL managed instance,
including us in the middle talking about the coolness
Correct.
effect, which is a great segue, Ben, to finish off this episode. Super clutch. I always love you coming with nice demos. I always appreciate the demo that is on to the point, that shows the value proposition, and you did exactly that. So I appreciate that. Ben, talk to me for a second before we're wrapping things up. Where do people can find you? What are the things that you are doing these days?
So, where people can find me, I'm still on Twitter at bwiseman, and I also moved to Mastodon as well, but I'm not really active there yet. I'm still seeing what's happening. You can also find me on LinkedIn, obviously. So if you want to chat about data warehousing, BI, or Arc, or big data clusters, even though it's not that much of a thing anymore, find me there. I'm always happy to chat about all nerdy kinds of stuff. If you're going to be at SQL Bits, I will be at SQL Bits. So if any of the videos will be there, please come and say hello. And other than that, I'll just see what other exciting stuff is happening in the near future that I can get my hands dirty with, I guess.
Definitely. And we're going to link all your details in the description down below. I'm curious, for our audience, I'm curious to hear in the comments below, is this something that you're planning on using? You saw the demo coming from Ben on deploying data services with Kubernetes, or with kubectl more specifically. You saw the YAMLs, you saw all those gizmos. Curious to hear. Let me know in the comments down below. What do you think about that? And Ben, I want to say thank you for joining me for yet another awesome Jumpstart Lightning episode. Always fun to have you on the show. For the Jumpstart viewers, make sure to like, subscribe. As you can see, more videos, more super cool guests, and more awesome demos. So we're going to see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.